Daniel Harris is with us this morning too. Daniel, good morning to you. How you doing?
Hi, you alright?
Yeah, which of those Champions League games would you be watching if you had to pick one and one alone?
Tonight.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'd need to have a proper peruse of the fixture. This is simply because I'm watching Shakhtar and City for work. So I guess I should probably say that one. But I'm absolutely certain that if I actually had a free choice, it would not be that one.
Let's talk a little bit about Man United before we talk about any of the other stuff that's going on. What did you take from the 3-3 draw at the weekend? Certainly the Manchester United fans who I was following on Twitter in that first half were like, "Oh, this is pretty bad." I think you made the point that Fred was holding things together for Manchester United. That's how bad things were. Yeah,
and Andreas Pereira had one of the great nightmares, which was an absolute pleasure to watch in some ways. I felt like, I mean, the first 70 minutes were terrible. On the other hand, I suppose they didn't concede as many goals as they could have done, and they have started scoring them. And that's taken a while. The question, I think, is, are they scoring goals now because those attackers are good players? And eventually they will happen upon a seam of form across a few games in a game? Or is there something in part of the process that has clicked? On Sky last night, Gary Neville was saying that what those players need is they need some experience with them. And that is a good point in that good teams that have young players in them also tend to have experience in them. I'm not certain that there's a swathe of 24 to 27-year-old elite-level players who are desperate to come and play for Manchester United. And also, it strikes me as somewhat weird that professional footballers need older players to inspire them to run around and work hard. I don't really see that those elements of football are secret and you only understand them once you've been playing for a certain number of years. And I think that is a problem with this Manchester United team. In particular, the one that I find that there's a particular problem of is Anthony Martial, who, if you're playing at centre-forward, you should be knocking centre-halves around, whether physically, mentally or both. It should be a proper tussle for those centre-backs who are marking you. You should be backing into them. You should be shoving them. You should be taking them into places they don't want to go. You should be running channels. You should be running in behind. And what you see from Martial is when he gets a pass he likes the look of, he comes alive. And that's not good enough. If you watch Sergio Aguero play, for example, he will occupy two centre-backs with his movement, with darting runs. He'll come short. He'll go in the box. And if your centre-forward is not prepared to do that, then he won't show for the ball. Then it's quite hard to build attacks. And so the Fred Pereira situation, I mean, no manager in the world could make a midfield axis of those two look good or work. So it was clear when you saw United's team that they were going to have a problem in that area. But there are other areas of the team where you could expect things to be better. And when I looked at United and when I looked at the way that they played, it was that main area of centre-forward where I felt like he should be the one who's taking the pressure off this ludicrously substandard midfield.
Do you think that the forwards for Manchester United, Daniel, just actually think that Fred and Pereira are shite as well, and then they're just trying a little bit less hard because they don't have a midfield maestro behind them?
I'm fairly sure they must know that they're not good. I mean, yeah, they have to play with them. I mean, we can watch them and say these guys aren't any use. They have to actually play with them. So, yeah, I'm sure that they do know, but that's not a reason to abdicate professional responsibility on any given occasion. And so, not really. And the problem is also that they can't be. Those two are not going to protect your back four or your back whatever it was, your back five, your back three. You call it what you like. And that being the case, the onus is on the strikers to keep the ball down the other end of the pitch, which is why it was an error that Solskjaer made when United went ahead. As soon as United went ahead, they have a huddle, him and Phelan and Carrick and McKenna, and they take off Martial and they bring on Tuanzebe. And I understand why they did it, in that they thought that there's not long to go, so they should thicken the midfield to protect the defence. But actually, the ball just needed to be kept away from that defence, and they would have been better trying to get a fourth goal and a fifth goal. And that was really where the game was drawn in the end.
Do you think Solskjaer knows why things went right for them in the end at the weekend? Because it sometimes seems a little bit random, these upshoots in form. Because as you say, the first 70 minutes were atrocious. It just seems so out of form with what Manchester United showed on the day to put in that performance in the last 20 minutes. I wonder if Solskjaer even knows why it changed.
No, I think that's unfair actually, because I think he made good changes. He brought Lingard on at half time, and things got a bit better. And he put Lingard in, and he brought Greenwood on and put Lingard into the middle of the midfield, which gave United a ball carrier there and some pace. So I don't think that's true, and also you can watch it and you can just look at who United's players are before you even actually look at the game. You can see that a front three of Rashford, Martial, and James, and then especially when you chuck Greenwood into it as well. If you get the ball up there, they're going to cause trouble for any team because they're all good players. So I think that is why it happened. Sheffield United tired of it as well. They do a lot of pressing. They play their game is quite physically demanding. So yeah, I wouldn't say that it was random. The problem is obviously, we talk about this a lot, is United's midfield. But the problem is also United's defence. And in some ways that's more troubling because a lot of money has been spent on that defence. And they cannot be relied upon to see out a lead. We've seen United, they lost the lead against Wolves. They lost the lead against Southampton quite late on against 10 men. They lost the lead in the last few minutes against Liverpool. They lost the lead against Arsenal. They lost the lead the other day. And really, if you spend £80 million on a centre-back who is meant to have, he's not got any pace. The reason why he's meant to be so good is these leadership qualities and these organisational qualities, and he's meant to inspire those around him. Harry Maguire should be seeing out these games almost on his own. And that is repeatedly not happening. And so far, what we've seen from Harry Maguire is he's a good player, he's a decent player, and he's probably improved United in some ways. But he's not made the critical difference that £80 million of centre-back that you decided to spend rather than actually have a serviceable midfield was meant to make. And actually, Chris Smalling was a serviceable centre-back. So the upgrade from Smalling to Maguire is probably not especially reflected in points. And if you'd have spent the Maguire money on the midfield and kept Smalling, I'm absolutely certain that United would have more points than what they've got. So you could say that Solskjaer's playing the long game in that he knows that the midfield needs support, needs help, but the elite level player, in his opinion, who was available to him in the summer was Maguire. And there's this notion that you build teams from the back, so that's what he did. But it's not, to me, looking like the wisest expenditure of limited funds.
Not a flop per se, but not a good decision to sign him.
Not a flop at all. Like, he's been okay, but for £80 million, and it's not about whether he's worth £80 million or not, because if you sign a player and they're success for you, then a player is worth whatever money you're lucky enough to pay for them, because most transfers don't work. But for £80 million, you're signing a Premier League player also. They should be able to come in and make a remarkable difference immediately. And when your budget is limited, there's an opportunity cost. Did you spend your money on X or did you spend it on Y? And rather than buy midfield, Solskjaer bought Maguire. And I don't feel like United would have many fewer points if they'd not have bought Maguire, kept Smalling, who's a decent Premier League level defender and actually really good in a rear guard. So possibly more likely, in fact, to have helped United retain these leads and spent it on the midfield that would keep the ball away from the defence and actually have perhaps allowed you to score more goals in the early part of the season when United were really struggling. I would say that would have been a better expenditure of the money. And I mean, I was on here saying it at the time. So it wasn't unobvious to an amateur, because an amateur like me thought that was the case.
Harry Maguire, I'm just checking his age there, turns 27 next March. Most of the big clubs at the moment in world football have a fetish for signing very young players, and most of the rest of Manchester United's transfer dealings over the last couple of years would reflect that too. It's interesting when you're having that conversation earlier about experience. Do you expect him to go out and buy somebody like a João Moutinho type figure, and you see the role that he performs for Wolves, somebody like him, obviously not him, but somebody like him for the midfield role as a stopgap while some of these young players are developing and evolving?
Probably not, no. You never know exactly what United will do in the transfer market. I mean, we watch it, we know, everyone knows that they need players, but then at the same time, Solskjaer's already sort of got his excuses in. Last week, talking about how it's difficult to sign players in January. He might not be able to get anyone. Clubs don't want to sell their players. So they have already started to suggest that won't happen. And the player that they're meant to be interested in, that the most people who purport to know the most think that they're interested in, is Declan Rice, who to me looks like a centre-back playing in midfield, not like someone who's going to be able to conduct games for you. I think the other thing is that United know that they've got some good midfield players coming through, at least one or two of whom they expect to make it. There's a kid signed from Monaco called Hannibal Medbury, who they think will be in the first team in a couple of years minimum. There's also Dylan Levitt, who's already in the Wales squad, and Jimmy Garner. And they think that there's a good chance that at least one, maybe two or three of those guys will make it. So in some ways, signing someone who's 27, 28 makes sense, because then you're not essentially putting them in front of these players, because by the time those players are ready, your more experienced player is finished. But I don't think that's what will happen. But it's impossible to predict what United will do. I think the chances is they will try and buy another young player, another young British player probably, and they may or may not be good.
If you had to turn back the clocks and you were involved in the Manchester United hierarchy, Daniel, who would that midfield signing have been if your transfer kitty was £80 million? Like, you look at the midfield signings that have been made in the off-season before now, it would have been Tanguy and Ndombele, it would have been Rodri, although that was kind of squared off a good while beforehand by Manchester City. Who would that person have been that would have made that material difference? Because they have spent money in midfield and they have failed.
It's hard to know necessarily who you can get. I mean, United, no secret, wanted Sean Longstaff, who is someone I really like the look of, and I would be prepared to back Michael Carrick's judgment in that regard, because he knows the player, he knows the person as well. His brother knows him really well, and Carrick played in that position. So if they had wanted to buy Longstaff, it would have been very easy to say that seems like a good buy, and someone I also really like what I've seen. I mean, the dream signing for me would have been Saul, but why would he leave Atletico Madrid? Similarly, I think Thomas Partey is a good player. He was someone else I would have also looked at. So that's three players who are off the top of my head I think might have made United better. There's a young player, Camavinga, in France, who is meant to be exceptional, but he is young, and I'm not going to pretend I watch a lot of Rennes, because I don't. There are people on the internet that will tell you that they do, and also tell you that he is also very good. But I don't know. Wilfred Ndidi, if I was going to Leicester, I would say Wilfred Ndidi and Harry Maguire were definitely. Wilfred Ndidi and Yuri Tielemans were two players I would have signed well before I signed Harry Maguire. So and Tielemans cost Leicester, relatively speaking, bugger all. So I don't buy the notion that there aren't players available to whom United's exchequer could stretch. So you never know. As I said with the transfer, 50% hit rate on transfers for any manager is pretty good. You don't know which ones are going to work, but there are midfield players who would make United better. And in a sense, you're not just looking for midfield players who make United better, because United is so weak in that area that there are loads of players who aren't really good enough for where United want to get to who would make United better. What you're looking for is the players that are going to take United back to where United were. And Wilfred Ndidi looks like a player who could do that. And he's looked for 2 years like he was going to develop into that kind of player. But yeah, the dream would have been Saul, but I can't imagine he would fancy leaving Atletico to go and play for United, particularly. Last
question for you. Has Jose Mourinho already fixed Spurs? Dele Alli saying that this guy's a genius. He's talking to me like a human being. He locked Christian Eriksen away for a couple of hours last night and said, time to shit or get off the pot. So, all of the issues that Spurs had wrapped up in 24 hours.
It's amazing. I mean, Mourinho's a brilliant manager. Anyone who thinks otherwise doesn't understand football. The question is whether Mourinho, the person, has allowed himself to become overtaken by his bad elements that will stop him being the all-time great manager that he already is. Things with Mourinho tend to start okay, and then they tend to disintegrate, and that has happened everywhere he's been. But if Spurs can get 2 years of success out of him, then that will be worth it for them. I doubt that he's solved the problems with Spurs, but I'm sure that he's had a revitalising effect on players who felt that they'd gone stale under Pochettino. And as we said the other day, my complaint with Levy and Pochettino wasn't that Levy fired Pochettino, it was that he allowed him to get to this point. And the fact that it got to the point where Pochettino had to be fired was bad form on Levy's part, because the only thing he really had to do was keep Pochettino happy. But the reality is that if the players had had enough of Pochettino, didn't want to play for him, then the manager in that circumstance has to go. So getting rid of Pochettino is a no-brainer, and anyone that comes in, you would expect to see some kind of bounce, never mind whether it's someone who the players will be fascinated to see who he is and how he relates to them. So Mourinho he's got this great job now that he probably didn't think he was going to get so quickly. So he is probably quite excited about life, and he's got much better players than he had at United. So I'm sure for now he's excited. The question is, for how long that level of excitement and charisma and love and joy can be maintained before the griping and the grudges and the bitching and the whining and the negativity take over. And if he can banish that part of himself, because again, like he did at United, he's got a job that perhaps he didn't think would come up for him, then he's a brilliant manager. And if not, then he's a mood hoover.
I think an underrated part of this story is that he's going to be living at home instead of living in a suite in the Lowry. I think it's a big deal to be happy in your personal life.
It's absolutely a big deal to be happy in your personal life. And whether or not he's happy in his personal life, I don't know. But he still acted like a bitch at Chelsea when the second time round, when he was at home. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's the answer. But as a general point, I absolutely agree. We'd all like to be happy in our personal life. I'm saying this in a really loud voice in the hope that my wife will hear.
We'll leave it there. Daniel, good stuff. Enjoy tonight's games. Thanks a million.
Bye.
Daniel Harris there talking to us about the situation. I mean, he did act like a bitch in Chelsea. It was the immediate return after the summer when he had the fight with the doctor that caused the conflagration that blew everything up.
And that summer tour as well. He wasn't happy with the long haul flights to the United States, wasn't it?
What was the
like every team has to do it, and he wasn't.
Yeah, what was
willing to go along?
Did we ever find out really what was the cause of all that?
Something went wrong in that summer.
Did he want out of? He wanted to get the Man United job.
Potentially, actually, yeah, potentially.
Should have just bought a gaff in Manchester.
That full story has kind of been well explored, but you'd imagine there's a little bit more once the dust is settled, and Jose kind of tells a story about that.
Here's Gary.
It'll happen again. It'll happen again.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting 18 months / 3 seasons.